At a corner in Manhattan, near the bustling Times Square, a man sat with his gaze lost in the void. His name was Elijah, though few knew it. To most, he was just another forgotten figure in the landscape of the city that never sleeps. The tattered jacket he wore was far too thin to combat the cold of that early winter. His hands, tucked into patched gloves, gripped a small paper cup with a few coins, the result of a long, silent morning. Elijah never begged. He never asked. He simply sat there, like a shadow, hoping someone might notice. Almost no one ever did. People hurried past, their eyes fixed on their destinations, as if the man sitting on the sidewalk was just another part of the concrete beneath their feet. The scent of baked pretzels from a cart on the corner made his stomach growl, but he didn't move. He had learned long ago that pride was the last thing a man invisible to the world could hold on to. Then something caught his attention. A pair of expensive shoes, Italian, polished, gleaming, reflecting the city's lights. Elijah raised his eyes slowly, meeting the gaze of a man in an impeccable suit, his expression as cold as the wind slicing through the street. The man looked at him with a mix of curiosity and disdain, as though he were assessing something that didn't belong. These people always in such a rush. And you, what did you do to end up like this? The tone was more a verdict than a question. Elijah didn't answer, but felt the weight of the words like a punch. He had heard it before, but today, something felt different. The crowd continued to flow around them, oblivious to the silent exchange between the two men. And at that moment, Elijah felt a chill run down his spine. It wasn't from the cold, but from a dark intuition. Something was about to happen. The Italian shoes stopped in front of Elijah, gleaming under the neon lights flickering above. The man wearing them, fair-skinned, with neatly combed hair and a gold watch that likely cost more than a year's rent in Manhattan, crossed his arms. He stared down at Elijah as if appraising a mistake that needed correcting. "Look at this, another deadweight on society," said the millionaire, his voice dripping with cynicism. "Do you even realize you're in people's way? Or is that beyond you too?" Elijah slowly lifted his gaze, trying to ignore what he knew was coming. He had encountered men like this before. Wealthy, powerful, accustomed to belittling others as a way to feel even larger. "Come on, buddy," the man continued, letting out a laugh that sounded like a dry snap. "Do you really think sitting there with that paper cup will change anything? The world doesn't owe you a thing. If you can't get up, that's your problem." The words hung in the air like a knife, sharp and deliberate. Elijah kept his eyes down, fighting back the anger bubbling in his chest. He knew responding was pointless, but every word felt like a direct blow to his dignity. "Do you even think about trying to improve? Getting a job?" "No, of course not," the man mocked, pointing at the cup of coins. "It's easy to just sit there and wait for people who actually work hard to do it for you, isn't it?" The man's voice began to draw attention. Passers-by slowed, some stopped, though no one intervened. A woman in a red coat pretended to take a photo of the neon sign behind the millionaire, but Elijah knew she was texting about him. "And what did you do to end up here, huh?" The man leaned forward, a cold smile on his face. "Drugs? Booze? Or just plain laziness? But you had everything handed to you and threw it all away. Isn't that how it always goes with you people?" Elijah felt his blood boil but didn't react. He had been knocked down many times before, but never like this. The growing crowd around him was a cruel reminder that he was utterly alone. He wanted to shout, to stand up, but his legs felt like lead. Satisfied with Elijah's silence, the millionaire spread his arms like an actor before an audience. "See, this is what happens when you give up on being somebody. You become nothing." And then, as if the universe had heard Elijah's silent scream, the sound of an SUV pulling up to the curb cut through the air. A commanding presence emerged from the vehicle, immediately drawing the crowd's attention. The murmurs in the crowd ceased as a black SUV parked near the corner. The car doors opened, and out stepped a figure no one expected to see. Wearing his unmistakable blue suit, red tie, and impeccably styled hair, Donald Trump appeared, exuding his signature air of self-assurance. The gazes that had been fixed on the millionaire and Elijah now turned toward the new arrival. It was as if the air had been sucked from the street. Every person held their breath, trying to confirm what their eyes were seeing. Trump paused for a moment, his eyes scanning the scene before him. There was a calculated coldness in his gaze, but at the corners of his mouth, there was a hint of understanding, as if he grasped exactly what was happening. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice commanding the space around him. "What do we have here?" The silence that fell over the group was heavy, almost tangible. People around took photos and recorded videos, but no one dared to speak. Finally, Trump turned to the millionaire with a slight smile. The kind of smile that felt more like a weapon than a friendly gesture. "So," he said, with a dramatic pause, "you were giving a moral lesson, is that it?" The millionaire opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. He stood there, uncomfortably aware that all eyes were on him. "Interesting," Trump continued, crossing his arms and tilting his head slightly. "Because from what I see, the only lesson being taught here is how to look small in front of a crowd." A faint murmur of surprise rippled through the crowd, and the millionaire turned as red as a tomato. Trump stepped forward again, placing himself directly between the arrogant man and Elijah. "Now, let's make one thing very clear," he said, his tone growing firmer. "I don't tolerate this kind of behavior. Not today, not here." Trump's eyes narrowed, and the millionaire seemed to shrink under the weight of his presence. Elijah, still silent, watched the scene with a mix of disbelief and confusion. The crowd waited, suspenseful, for what would happen next. Trump took another step, now standing fully in front of Elijah, like a shield between him and the millionaire. His posture was firm, his presence overwhelming. He pointed a finger at the millionaire, like a hammer about to fall. "Let me ask you something," he began, his tone heavier. "Do you think your bank account gives you the right to step on others? Because if that's the case, listen carefully, you're completely mistaken." The millionaire tried to open his mouth, but Trump didn't give him space. He raised a hand, silencing him almost theatrically. "I'm not finished," Trump continued, his eyes fixed on the man. "You think you know everything about this man just because he's sitting here? Let me tell you something you clearly don't understand. Every person you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about." The crowd, once merely curious, now seemed fully engaged in the scene. Some even began nodding in agreement. "Look closely at him," Trump said, pointing to Elijah without breaking eye contact with the millionaire. "You see a man on the ground, but do you know what I see? Potential. A story you haven't even tried to understand." The millionaire swallowed hard, trying to maintain composure, but he was visibly uncomfortable. He took a step back, but Trump stepped forward, keeping the pressure on. "You think flashing your expensive watch and humiliating others makes you great? Let me give you some free advice, my friend. Greatness doesn't come from material things. Greatness comes from how you treat people, especially those who can't give you anything in return." The crowd murmured. Some began clapping softly, while others continued recording with their phones. Trump then turned to Elijah, crouching down to meet him at eye level. His expression, once stern, softened. "And you," he said, in a calmer tone. "I don't know what brought you here, but one thing I do know. This doesn't define who you are. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Elijah looked at Trump, still speechless, but there was something different in his gaze now. Something like hope, even if just a flicker. Trump stood again, adjusting his suit, and looked around as if daring anyone to disagree. "So here's what's going to happen," he said, turning back to the millionaire. "You're going to apologize to this man, and you're going to think twice before opening your mouth the next time you feel the need to act superior." The millionaire hesitated, but the weight of the situation, and the crowd now glaring at him with disdain, was too much. Stammering, he mumbled something that could pass as an apology. Trump, satisfied, gave a slight nod. "Good. Now, maybe you can learn something from this moment." He then looked at the crowd, which was now applauding openly. With a subtle smile, Trump made a small gesture with his hand, as if to say, "It's all good now." As the millionaire retreated, humiliated, Trump remained by Elijah's side, an unexpected guardian. While the people around continued watching, their faces filled with admiration and reflection. The noise of the crowd began to quiet as Trump raised his hand, signaling he still had something to say. The entire street seemed transformed into a stage, and he was the absolute protagonist. "Let me say something to all of you," he began, looking around, making sure no one escaped his words. "This isn't just a moment between an arrogant man and another trying to survive. This is a reflection of the society we've created." He paused, letting his words echo in the tense silence. "We live in a country where we judge people by appearances, by what they wear, by what they own. But what really matters? Character, dignity, the strength to keep going, even when the world is against you." The murmurs returned among the crowd, now filled with agreement. Some nodded, others crossed their arms, reflecting on his words. Trump turned back to the millionaire, who was visibly uncomfortable but still there, trapped by the weight of humiliation. "You have money, of course," Trump said, gesturing toward him with calculated precision. "But money will never buy respect. It will never buy true admiration from anyone. Do you know why? Because people see who you are by what you do when no one's watching." He took a step forward, addressing the crowd now. "And you," he said, pointing to the spectators, "you also have a responsibility. It's not enough to stand by, watch, and record. You have the power to intervene, to change a situation, to do what's right, even when it's easier to ignore it." A man in the crowd lowered his phone, ashamed. A woman beside him looked down, as though processing the weight of those words. Trump turned back to Elijah, his voice now softer, almost paternal. "And you," he said, crouching down to meet the man at eye level again. "No matter where you are now, it doesn't define who you'll be tomorrow. Remember that. Every step you take, every small victory, is a reminder that you're stronger than anyone here imagines." Elijah finally spoke, his voice weak but laden with emotion. "Thank you, sir. I don't know what to say." Trump gave a slight smile, placing a hand on Elijah's shoulder. "Say that you'll believe in yourself, because that's enough." The crowd began to applaud, the sound swelling and echoing down the street like a wave of emotion. The millionaire, embarrassed, stepped back without saying another word, blending into the spectators. Trump stood and gave one last look around, waving to the crowd. "Remember, every day is an opportunity to do something that matters. Don't waste it." He turned and began walking back to the car. Before getting in, he glanced one last time at Elijah and said, "You have more allies than you realize. Use that." The black SUV disappeared down the street, but the impact of his intervention lingered. The crowd began to disperse slowly, but many seemed different, more thoughtful, more human. Elijah, now alone again, felt something he hadn't felt in years, a spark of hope. As the black car turned the corner, the once passive crowd began to react in unexpected ways. A young man dressed in a delivery uniform was the first to approach Elijah, offering him a bottle of water and a sandwich with a genuine smile. "Hey, brother, I think you need this more than I do," said the young man, his voice humble. Elijah looked at the sandwich, surprised. It was the first time in years someone approached him without fear or disdain. He took the food with trembling hands, murmuring a barely audible thank you. Soon, others followed. An elderly woman left a folded blanket beside Elijah, and a man in a suit discreetly slipped a few bills into his hand. Elijah couldn't find the words to express his gratitude, but his eyes sparkled with emotion, reflecting a mix of disbelief and thankfulness. The millionaire, still watching from a distance, looked unsettled. He observed the people around him, trying to understand what had changed. It was as though Trump's gesture had ignited something no one expected. Slowly, he approached Elijah again, this time with a different expression, a mix of shame and hesitation. I'm sorry," the millionaire said, his voice faltering. "I acted like a jerk. I don't know what came over me. Elijah looked up, still holding the sandwich, and met the man's gaze. He said nothing for a moment, then took a deep breath and replied, "Apologizing isn't easy, but it's not me you need to prove you've changed to. It's yourself." The millionaire stood still, processing those simple yet profound words. He nodded slowly, as if something inside him had broken and been rebuilt simultaneously. Meanwhile, the street, once a place where indifference reigned, had transformed into a scene of compassion. People began talking to each other, sharing stories and acts of kindness. The atmosphere had completely shifted. Elijah felt a hand on his shoulder. It was the young deliver man again. "You don't have to stay here, you know. There are places that can help, and I know some of them. If you want, I can take you there." For the first time in years, Elijah considered accepting help. He looked around at the people who had approached him, at the millionaire who now seemed so small, and finally at the spot where Trump had stood. "Yes," Elijah said, his voice steady. "I think it's time to try something different." As he stood up, supported by the young man, the crowd parted, watching in respectful silence. There were no more judgmental stares, only empathy. That day, something changed not only for Elijah, but for everyone who witnessed the event. The bustling New York corner, once just another among many, became a symbol of transformation, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, one act of courage can rekindle humanity's flame.
If you like this story, you will definitely like this exciting story too. And don't forget to leave your like and also subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video.